Hey, Bob, it's great to connect today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey Nate, thanks for having me on.
We've got so many overlapping interests, some that we discovered just before we hit record, but I wrote my dissertation on why I think we're prone to underestimate AI. You've obviously done so much in tech. We were both in Silicon Valley, overlapping for probably quite a few years. And then, of course, when I travel, I love Yelp. It's like my most favorite app, no matter where I go. So I'm excited to chat with you today. And as you think back on your career in tech, what have you learned that you would most like to pass on to others?
Yeah, I have one idea to focus on for our chat, which is the power of asking this question to yourself. What is the most important problem in my field, and am I working on it?
I've never asked myself that question.
So it's inspired by an essay I read by an American mathematician called Hamming. I encourage people to go read the original essay. And he lays out an approach. He's a very successful mathematician throughout his career, worked on a lot of important problems. And so, I think demonstrated this habit throughout his career as a mathematician. But I think it's applicable in any area of work where you want to be successful and work on interesting stuff. And it's really surprising to me that more people don't ask themselves, what is the most important problem in my field? And then perhaps those that do and are aware of it, how few actually make conscious moves to go and work on the most important problem in their field. And this can be applied to any field. I mean, obviously it's relevant to technology, but it's just as relevant to an academic career, or indeed a career in just about anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I hear so much career advice about what is your passion? What are your talents? What are you good at? Like, what do you want to do? What will make you happy? Where are you going to make money? And I've never actually thought about this approach. What is the most important problem in your field? And it reminds me of something like, like Naval Ravikant talks about a lot. Like, if you make yourself valuable, you'll have a great network. You'll have enough money. You'll have enough status. And so I really like this approach of thinking about what is the most important problem, work on that. And then so many of the other things, like purpose, is going to come from if we're working on the most important thing, like we'll have purpose, we'll have drive, motivation. So as you think about this question, then how have you applied it in your own life?
Well, I'll take you back to 2004, which is a year where I was hanging out with Naval in San Francisco because he used to spend time at the incubator that Max Levchin set up called
Mhm.
Midtown Doornail. And I just joined as a front end engineer and user interface designer to help with the various things that were being prototyped in the incubator. Yelp was one of those things that was prototyped and ultimately became a standalone company, which is how I got involved early on. But but during that time, it was sort of the dawn of the user-generated content era. And the way I found myself working, why was I in San Francisco, right? I grew up in the UK. My degree was in literature and philosophy. And yet at 24, I was in San Francisco at the dawn of when we look back, a new industry, the social media industry and the Web 2.0. And I think I found myself there because I've been asking this question for a few years until that point, which is, yeah, what's the most important thing happening in the time that I'm living? I suppose I applied it and I still do apply it, in that way too. It's not just like I'm in a field, so now what's the problem? It's broader than that for me. It's like, what's the most important thing happening in the world today that I could make a contribution to, or I feel passionate to about, or I have a connection to? And what led me there was actually that I was studying the invention of the print press. I was doing a master's at Oxford in medieval literature, and I was kind of specializing in language theory through this degree because I was very interested in the idea of what is language, and I was just following my intellectual interest, I guess. But I felt there's something important to do with language and language theory that had drawn me to that field and that I was working on. But as a result of being in that field, I was looking at the invention of the print press and seeing the incredible impact it had on society. Just the simple act of making the production of books cheaper completely transformed literacy rates, for example, across Europe. Before the print press, literacy rates were at 5%. So it's just the wealthiest 5% of the population were taught to read because no one could afford books. But
Mhm.
you make books cheaper, more and more people can read, right? And literacy rates jumped up. It's just one example. So I was looking at that thinking that's just a technology, it's just an invention that completely transformed society. And so and the internet was just coming up, right? It's like late 90s, early 2000s, and and it dawned on me that this is the biggest leap in information technology since the invention of the print press, and it's happening right now. You know, I'm in my early 20s and it's happening right now. And so it dawned on me that I should do everything I can to work on that because it looked like the most important thing happening in our time, just from like an outside in perspective. And so I built applications. I'd been coding for a while, but in different environments as a hobby. I pulled up those skills and started learning new languages and just kind of jumped in. And and then the same felt true for me about artificial intelligence. You know, looking back at like 2010, realizing that everything was getting digitized and thinking, well, if everything gets digitized and we have language in a digital format, then we're going to be able to do incredible things with it. For the first time we'll have all language in one place. Like that was clear to me in 2010. And so I started working on that field. And so I think I think you can even, if you're not already in a field, you can even take a step back and say, what are the most important things happening today? And there's loads of important things happening today. I mean, we live in an age of like the most interest,
Yeah.
probably the most interesting time in history. There's so much important stuff happening. You can look at any field in healthcare, in education, in politics, in the academic realm, in technology, and in any field you want to look at, there's so much stuff at the forefront. And I'm a fan of trying to put yourself on the forefront of some emerging new field and jumping in early, trying to have any role you can in that. Because I think that, well, it's fun and interesting, but you're also skating to where the puck is going, to use the ice hockey
Yeah.
analogy.
So, as you think about this question today, when you ask yourself, what is the most important problem in your field today? What are you thinking about? I'm assuming it's something AI related, but is that assumption correct?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm thinking about most at the moment is how do businesses really apply generative AI? Because we have like this massive ball of new power and potential
Hmm.
in the technology, but ultimately it has no value on its own, which is curious because most technology shifts are integrated into processes. Like e-commerce, for example, when it came up, was always integrated into a business model, right? It's new ways to sell things, right? New ways to reach customers. Whereas generative AI in and of itself is just a new ball of power. And then we have businesses that are where value gets created and where every good and service is sort of delivered through. And so, and yet this bridge is not obvious. You know, there's a lot to be done to figure out how to implement this technology in the business environment. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, and I'm doing some of that work at the moment.
Okay, really interesting. And I agree with you. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote my dissertation on kind of a psychological perspective on why we're prone to underestimate AI, because I could see it was so important. Though I arrived there without kind of asking myself the question. I was just like, oh, this is just interesting. So I want to do it. So I really like this framework. I've been thinking a lot about the two fundamental motives we have, basically. Agency, meaning we have this motive to excel and get good at things and expand our, capabilities. And communion, we have the motive to connect with others. And when we can marry those two and we're excelling while contributing or connecting with
Hmm.
people, we're contributing something valuable. And so what I like about this framing that you've got is it like it laser focuses on something that will automatically be a contribution to society because it's the most important problem that we're dealing with. So
Hmm.
maybe another question related to this then, as you've tried to apply this in your own life, has anything surprised you?
Just on your comment on that, I really believe in making a contribution. I really believe in um, doing the most valuable thing that I can with my time. You know, I believe that I believe in work. I believe in doing good work. I believe in working hard, and I believe in um, trying to do things that make the world a better place in some way, and um, and to you know, so then it becomes, well, what should I work on?
Yeah.
Like that's why I think a lot about what to work on. Because if you care about that question, like you say, we're not here forever. So well, where are we going to have impact? And trying to do that in the most leveraged way possible is interesting to me. Um, I guess I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but I can't help but think about why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And well, constantly revisiting that question. And it's easy not to. It's easy to end up in a track in life and just have your head down and be like, this, like, I think it's so useful to, it can be painful as well, but to like step back regularly and say, like, why am I doing this? Is this the right thing to be doing?
Yeah, I think that it's like I said, it's just like a laser focus to help us like really it gives us the opportunity to like find meaning in life also.
Hmm.
And certainly hit on the contribution and like contributing something valuable to society. Well, but I love the lesson. I look forward to thinking about this myself and sharing this with my students, children, of course. Maybe, okay, so two more questions.
Yeah,
One
go
is,
for it.
how do you try to like teach this to your children, or have you yet?
Mm. That's a good question. They're still very young.
Okay.
So I think it's definitely something I would like to. I do speak to them about, areas of work, areas of contribution, and so on. But I think it's something I suppose that becomes most helpful as you get a little bit older. Um, yeah, I think it's but having it there as a fundamental question, like during the education process, is probably a good thing. Like you made a decision on your dissertation, right? You mentioned it earlier. You made a decision to work on that. That must have felt like the right thing to work on, and you wrote it on why we underestimate the power and potential of AI, which has turned out to be a very prescient thing to work on. So as soon as I think you start to choose your subjects, so maybe it's around like 14. Like I don't think it's something we have to start thinking about in our mid-20s. I think it's something that we can think about in our teenage years.
Yeah, and it's like a combination. Okay, that's interesting too, because I was thinking like, okay, my 12-year-old, start thinking about the most important problem to work on. But the question was, what's the most important problem in your field? So that like, the
Mm,
assumption is that like you've got some preference, you've got some you know, natural ability in engineering or math or, healthcare. And so it's like a combination, and I'm just realizing this now. It's the
mm.
combination of your interests and your abilities with like, okay, now where can I make an impact? Because it's not saying, like what is the most important problem in the world and can I solve it? I mean, we may not have the ability to do that, though that would be another interesting question maybe we're thinking about. But I think the question is thoughtful and there's more to it than I first realized.
Yeah, I'll add something about like practically speaking, how do you get there? Like another concept that's related to from my standpoint is that I call it putting yourself in the furnace, because how to make a contribution in something that is a problem area and is therefore by definition, you know, in flux and uncertain, it's different, right? Working in an area like that is different. And and a technique I developed that I think about a lot for myself, and I'm sharing today is you have to put yourself in the furnace. And what I mean by that is you have to go into either it's a company or a research project, or you have to put yourself in a place where you are contributing to it, And I call it the furnace because it's uncomfortable.
Hmm.
It's hot in there, it's intense, the work is intense to keep up and to make a contribution. It's not a particularly comfortable place to be. And yet that's where you'll do your most important work. And that's where all the best developments and insights come from, right? When you put yourself on the forefront of something and you put yourself into that challenging position, then it's what it feels like to me. It just feels like being in a furnace. And and yet that's the cutting edge and that's where things are happening and it's messy and difficult and and yet unless you're in the furnace, you can't move things forward. You're not going to move the boundary on anything unless you're already in it and you're working in it, right? Because from the outside in, no one's good enough to, very few people are good enough to do that. I've probably come across a handful of people in my whole life who are brilliant enough outside in to analyze a market or analyze a new area of technology or a new scientific area. And from the outside in a calm and calculated way, go, that's the path forward. It's almost no one smart enough to do that. There are exceptions. So I will say I don't think it's impossible. There are exceptions, but most people are not that person. And so for most of us, the way to do it is put yourself in the furnace and then figure it out from there. Now you probably have a hypothesis going in about how to move that field forward and how to solve those problems, right, that are on the forefront, but you're probably wrong. Um, you're
Yeah.
probably wrong. Yeah, you'll be the best educated, guess you can, but you start that PhD and you think it's one thing, and then it turns out to be something else. You join that startup and they think they're going to do this, but it turns out actually the opportunity's over here. It's just never what you think it is, but you never figure it out. And the best solutions actually come out from people just being in the furnace and then going, oh, that's the opportunity. There are countless examples of this in tech. And frustratingly, we often like paste over the reality of what happened. In the case of um, Stuart Butterfield, the founder and CEO of Slack, every company he started, he was trying to do something else.
Yeah.
He started a gaming company twice that never worked. In one case, it turned into Flickr, and in the other case, it turned into Slack. So, he was starting a gaming company, but then figuring out it's so hard for all the engineers to coordinate with each other, and like these messaging apps just aren't good enough.
Yeah.
Let's build our own one. And then that turned out to be the company. That became Slack. Like almost every successful entrepreneur I know and most technologies did not get figured out from the outside in. They just put themselves in a furnace and then, figure things out from there. So yeah, that's hopefully that's given a little practical sense for people of the reality of the steps they may need to take.
Well, I love the metaphor because it's so easy for many of us to set goals of I want to be rich and retire. I want to start a company so I can sell it. And I think that's probably not the right approach. And it's almost like I want to get into the furnace and out of it as soon as possible. And
Yeah,
I love your approach of like, no, let's stay there and keep pushing work forward.
yeah, it's an honor to be in that position, to
Yeah.
get to work on things that are in the forefront of what's happening in your lifetime. And anyone can do that. Like this isn't something that's reserved for certain types of people. I really don't think it is. I mean, I've worked with people in all sorts of positions, in sales roles, in product roles, in engineering roles, executive assistants, finance people. You could be a great accountant. The question is, where are you going to apply those skills? Are you going to apply them in a 100-year-old business that's growing at 5% and churning out an industry that, was hot 60 years ago? Or are you going to be an accountant at OpenAI?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a choice about where to apply your skills. You can apply them in a problem space that's on the forefront of what's happening in your lifetime. Um, I know there's all sorts of limitations around that idea, and um, people have all sorts of different educational levels and all sorts of experience levels and so on. So I don't mean to make it sound overly simplified, but you get the idea, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like if you can work on the most important problem in your field, or you can work on one of the most important things happening in your lifetime, then why wouldn't you? And I just don't see that many people even asking that question. And so that's another reason why I think this idea gives an unfair advantage if you follow it, because you don't have as much competition as you think. Because there just aren't that many people who are following it that
Yeah.
way, you
Yeah.
know? Like I've seen some people knock on the door at my company, Quid, for example, over the years, but not many of them. I mean, we had a guy once who was living in Mexico, and he wrote to me personally and said, I've read all about the vision and the company. I totally get it. Here's why you're going to win. Here's why this is an important company. And all I want is to work for this company. I want to work on this. And I swiped and filed the email, you know. He wrote again, a month later. No, I think you've ignored my email, but I need to explain. Like, you don't think you get it. Like, this is what I need to do with my life. I need to work for this company. And again, I ignored it. And he wrote to me a third time, and he's like writing to everyone on the team, and he's banging down the door because he's found like this is the company I want to work for. This is a guy that had worked in analytics in Formula One, and so he didn't have a relevant skill set to us. He'd done some interesting things in analytics, but he didn't have that relevant a skill set. At the third time, I'm like, I got to interview this guy. And I did, and we ended up moving him from Mexico to join the company in San
Wow.
Francisco. Because his commitment and passion, genuinely like this is what he wanted to work on. And over the years, I can count on one hand the number of people that are knocked on our door like that. In other words, it just people don't do it that much. So I think it can be a little superpower if people adopt it.
Well, Bob, this is inspiring. I mean, this is like a great time for me in my career as well. Like, I'm going to start thinking about this question and what can I do to work on the most important problem in my field and with my abilities and my skill set. So I love the lesson. Any final words you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Well, we've together with my co-author, we've written a new book called Like, the button that changed the world, and it's about the invention of the like button, but it's more than that. It shows us the nature of innovation, how things really get built, and 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 so it's I think related to this topic actually, which is how do you put yourself in the furnace? What is it like there? And how do these things get built and imagined? Um, so yeah, it's available and in all good bookstores, and you can read more at likebook.org.
Well, like I said, Bob, you've inspired me, and I feel like I've learned a lot during this conversation. And so I look forward to reading the book because I want to get inside your head more. I want to learn more from you. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it. And thanks for inspiring me.
It's a pleasure, Nate. Thanks for having me on.